After high school, I dabbled unsuccessfully in college for 2 years. The only thing I was really successful at that point in my life was being unsuccessful at college. At 19, 20 years old, I still had no idea what I wanted to study or what to do professionally with my life. I got frustrated and I dropped out of college. I quickly moved out of my parents' house and got my first tiny apartment. To make ends meet, I waited tables during lunch hours at Pietro's restaurant. After my shift was done, I would go over to UPS and I would load trucks into the evening hours. A couple of years later, at the age of 21, I somehow got myself into a management training program at Meijer. But after a few years of working 50 or 60 hours a week inside a Meijer store, I really began to question if there was a better career out there for me. I mean, was there a better life? But because I never finished college, my options seemed extremely limited. Feeling completely stuck around 1995 at the ripe age of 27, I decided to go back to college to hopefully get an associate's degree. One of the first things I did was meet a counselor to see what the fastest path would be for me to get this elusive associate's degree. After reviewing the meager credits I'd accumulated when I was 18, 19, my counselor mentioned that I had an elective class to take. So I somewhat randomly chose Intro to Photography. It gets worse, trust me. I chose that class because honestly, I didn't have a lot of interest in photography. I just thought it was going to be an easy class. And it sort of was an easy class, not because photography or the class itself was easy, but because I discovered that I had completely fallen in love with photography. I mean, I loved photography so much. That first semester, we learned how to make black and white prints in the darkroom, and one of the things I loved the most was when you put the paper in the developer tray, the exposed image swirls around in the chemistry and the image would slowly reveal itself. It was like magic right before my very eyes. And I instantly began to feel like the path forward in my life was also magically revealing itself to me. I should mention that during this first photography class, I started to date my now wife, Kathleen. She was hot. Still is, by the way. Still is. It's going to be a good night. She was very supportive of my new all-consuming passion for photography. She believed in me, even though neither one of us knew anything about photography or the art world for that matter. Also, during that first class, I discovered that I loved to go out very late at night with my camera and tripod and photograph Grand Rapids, especially downtown where the city had put bright lights on all the bridges that span the Grand River. I would make these very long exposures, and the flowing river would become smooth and silky, and star trails would streak across the night sky. And I felt I was magically revealing a part of Grand Rapids that few people had ever seen before. Eventually, I gathered enough of these night images that I thought I should put on a small exhibition of my work at a local coffee shop because that's just what one does. The coffee shop was Four Friends, if anyone remembers that cafe. Gone, people. Just settle down. I framed up a dozen or so of my very best photographs and hung them in the coffee shop. And a couple of weeks later, I got a call from an executive at the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel. They absolutely loved my work and said they wanted to buy a bunch of my photographs and hang them inside one of the fancy restaurants inside the hotel. As you can imagine, I was truly blown away by this crazy turn of events. I mean, a 5-star hotel wanted to purchase my work and display it permanently. I felt like I had just boarded a rocket ship. I began to think, I've got something really special going on here, and everyone is going to want to purchase my photographs. Shortly after the sale of these photos to the hotel, Kathleen and I got married, and together we decided to open a very small gallery space downtown to sell my work to the public. It was tiny and the overhead was pretty low, and we had some success putting on small exhibitions, and I began selling my work to fancy law firms and other downtown businesses. But I quickly began to dream of a much larger gallery space where people could not only buy my work, but the work of fantastic photographers from all over the country. This new gallery I envisioned would become a destination for everyone to purchase and collect photographic art. A couple of years later, with great fanfare, we opened the photography room. It was I'll hold, I'm not sure what you're laughing at, but that's all right. It was a stunning gallery space, over 2,000 square feet of the most beautiful downtown loft space you would ever see. It was also very, very expensive to operate. The rent was very high. It was right next to Van Andel Arena, and it was in the mix with all the hot new bars and restaurants downtown. Kathleen and I had secured a hefty home equity loan to build out this gallery. We installed custom lighting. We purchased the coolest furniture by Herman Miller and Joseph Jupe. It was absolutely gorgeous. Our grand opening reception was bonkers, and I'm here to tell you it was bonkers. Over 500 of the city's biggest movers and shakers packed the gallery. The reception was electric. We served fancy wine and we served fancy cheese, and we all reveled in this space, this magical space that we had created. When we got home that night, Kathleen and I were ecstatic, and we felt that we were really onto something incredibly special. However, we only sold one piece of art that night, and I thought that was odd considering how many people had come and how much wine had been consumed. Over the next 3 to 4 years, this became an all too predictable pattern with packed opening exhibitions, lots of free wine and cheese consumed, and nearly zero art sales. So right out of the gate, I was struggling to make rent, to make payroll for our single employee, as well as advertise and promote the gallery, not to mention the staggering costs of mounting and framing new exhibitions. I could see that if things didn't change, we were quickly going to go bankrupt, and I was desperately doing any type of photography work that might help pay the bills, because clearly we were never going to be profitable just selling art. Almost every month, my wife would ask if there was any money I could transfer home to help cover our mortgage and other household expenses. Can you just pay the gas bill, Brian? Okay, maybe the cable bill. And every month I shamefully had to say no, that I was upside down and that we likely needed to rack up even more credit card debt just to keep everything going. We were drowning. I was drowning in frustration all over again. I mean, I couldn't even support my family, let alone this dream of becoming a successful art dealer. I felt foolish and more than worthless. Then in 2005, our third daughter, Faith, was born, and she inexplicably suffered a massive brain hemorrhage inside the womb at 37 weeks. An emergency C-section was performed. We weren't sure if she would survive. She had 2 brain surgeries, and we finally were able to get her home after she stabilized. Just 6 months after Faith was born, our 4-year-old daughter, Maddie, was diagnosed with type 1 juvenile diabetes. And if you know anything about that terrible disease, it's an absolutely dangerous and all-consuming practice to manage properly. For the next 3 years, we struggled on as a family with these devastating new twists in the health of our children. The gallery struggled financially, and we racked up even more of that debt. Kathleen was justifiably frustrated and would often beg me, and I mean beg me, if you could just make $20,000 in a year, I would be so happy. It was especially cutting because she had set the bar so low and I couldn't reach it. Nearly 7 years after opening the big gallery, the expensive lease on the photography room was fortunately coming to an end. I decided to liquidate as much inventory and that fancy furniture as I could, and I slashed prices to pennies on the dollar. I held a closing exhibition, and that liquidation sale was actually a smashing success. As it turns out, the only thing this community loves more than free wine and free cheese is a good deal. I spent the next couple of weeks moving out and cleaning up. I was totally defeated and just exhausted emotionally. Eventually, the gallery was entirely empty, and I remember looking back at the space as I closed the door and locked it for the last time. It was like it had died. It was like I had died. That magic that I had felt about photography had long since disappeared. I returned my key to my landlord's office up on the 5th floor. I rode the elevator down and I slowly wandered out to my car. I just kept thinking about my wife and 3 daughters. All the while, I was just wondering to myself, how the hell was I ever going to make $20,000 in 1 year?